right, hi guys. So this is the DADC semi-finals, I think gold semi-finals. Motions on the screen. As a charity successfully making the world a better place, we would reject donations from immoral actors. So the first thing I think we need to do, as always, to set up the debate, especially this one, because it's kind of vague. So I think it starts with a question of what charities are, right? And I think there are a few questions here that are important. First, the motion granted us that they are successful, right? So this then leads the question of what does a successful charity need and want? What do they do? The reason why you want to differentiate them from an unsuccessful charity is because you want to be specific to the context in the motion, right? Which is there, I think, to help Gov, to suggest that basically you've got enough money, therefore it's not like you're gonna collapse. And you could possibly also use it to suggest that not all the money successful charities get necessarily goes straight to helping people anyway. The reality is that, well, there will be a cost to the charities running. So this mitigation will will not go far at all. You just say that in the hope, you might just say that in the hope you can catch out the op, but I wouldn't place a lot of effort on it, right? The key thing to note is to say they're already helping a lot of people. They've got a lot of other funding sources, etc., because they're successful and they are able to have PR campaigns. People know of them, so that people they donate to, that the public donates to. That on Gov will help you frame your idea of what they need, want, and do, right? So you would say they already help people, they already have PR campaigns. So what they need is not necessarily just hard money, but presumably you might turn that into an argument on reputation, etc. On op, you do want to problematize this idea of successful charities. So the first thing on op that helps you is that you control the idea of what they need, want, and do, right? Because they help people. And so the fact that they need money to help people naturally tends itself to you. What op therefore needs to do is to think about what a successful charity actually is like and explain why a successful charity either one can still do a lot more and wants to do a lot more and therefore needs money, or second, is not a successful charity now does not make for a forever successful charity, and therefore they need money now in order to guard against the risk of having less money in the future. So I think that those comparisons are critical in order to explain the way in which a charity works and just to set up the basis of the debate moving forward. Next, right, donations. So there are like a bunch of questions here. And by this I refer to just donations in general. So who donates, right? And the answer will be, well, a bunch of people, right? You got your big donors, you got your small donors, people like, I guess, you and me, who, you don't have that much money to blow on giving massive donations like a corporation would, or a really rich person would. And then the other questions, right? Like how much do they donate? Which I sort of just answered. Why do they donate? How do they choose who to donate to? So this is important when you're both for characterizing these donors and for the immoral donors. And you notice the questions are kind of similar, but I'll get to why they differ. So if I'm thinking about just donations in general, and so at this point I'm thinking about non-immoral actors, or right? And this doesn't have to be just small people. I could also be referring to your rich non-immoral people, or rich people who we haven't figured out that they're immoral yet. So why do these people donate, right? And there's stuff here about reputation. There's stuff about just wanting to feel good about yourself, wanting to make a difference in the world. All of these may be reasons why people donate, and that consequently affects how they choose who to donate to, right? So like, for example, if I'm on Gov, I might well be like, look, people donate because they want to feel good about themselves and they want to be like have a good reputation. And presumably that doesn't happen in a world in which the public knows that there's this negative thing happening insofar as immoral actors are donating to these particular organizations. So that might be how I explain that donations reduce in a world where we take these immoral actors' donations. So asking these questions again helps you conceptualize of the debate and what's at stake here with regards to the issue of donations. Finally, on immoral donors. So the first question is, how are they immoral? And this one, honestly, I mean, run wild, right? People are immoral for a lot of reasons. But the important thing is to think about the next few questions. Why do they donate and who do they donate to? So I think it's fairly obvious why immoral donors donate. If it's not, go and read about it. The idea of like trying to make themselves look better in the public eye, I think. But the important thing is who they donate to. So when I watched this round, I'm not gonna name the schools or the teams involved, but a government team in my debate made the round about, for example, if you are Shell, right? If you're an environmental polluter, the environmental polluter donating to the environmental charity. And in fairness, when like I watched this round at uni level, very similar thing happened. So there was then a discussion in the room, and I'm prefacing all this because my view is not the necessarily correct view here, about whether these immoral actors are donating to charities that directly are hurt by their immoral actions. So is this about Shell donating to the environmental charity? This is about Harvey Weinstein donating to a Me Too charity. My take is no, because the motion says that the charity would reject donations from immoral actors, but it doesn't say that the op would accept all donations from immoral actors. And I think that it's fair to say that if I'm Me Too, it makes no sense that I'll take the donation from Harvey Weinstein. However, there was also an argument in the discussion that we had after training in uni that if immoral actors donate to clean their image, if your image is bad for polluting the sea, donating to I don't know, not Greenpeace, like donating to Me Too, for example, doesn't actually help your image that much. And so immoral actors are really donating for selfish reasons, which I don't think is that contestable. Then they would not donate to Me Too. They will only want to donate to whatever environmental charity will take their money. And so I think both of these stances are plausible. I obviously am inclined towards my interpretation of the debate, but like I'm not. I think that there is room to work both contexts in. You could litigate those contexts. I think the one that says, well, Harvey Weinstein won't be allowed to donate to Me Too will win, but that's my personal view. Anyway, the implicit question among all of this that I think I didn't put on the screen because it is implicit and tempting to not think about is what makes an actor immoral. And so I've watched multiple iterations of this round where excellent arguments were made about how there is no such thing as objective morality and immorality. I.e., we may think, right, that it's pretty immoral to pollute the reservoir, pollute the river. Presumably, someone in the world doesn't believe that is immoral, right? And there is no objective reason that we are correct and that fellow is wrong. Right? Because short of can't talk about religion, there's just no rule book that the world operates by that dictates right and wrong. Consequently, the question is what makes someone immoral has to go back to the nature of the motion. So I hope you've been thinking about it while I dragged out this explanation, but if not, you can pause. But I think the key thing to note is that immorality is determined by the actor, and this becomes important later for the debate. What do I mean by immorality is determined by the actor? I mean that if you're a charity, if there is no objective morality and immorality, the debate actually switches to this house would reject donations from actors that we as the charity deem are immoral, because I think that's the only way the motion can take place in the real world, right? So in other words, there is no objective morality and immorality. Honestly, there is no need for Gov to define immoral actors so much as to give some quick examples of actors who would probably be deemed as immoral by most reasonable human beings. But it's important to note that a decision is being made to label people as immoral or immoral by the charity, because that's the only way the motion can work. Right. So what does all of this suggest for the round? On the charity, I think it suggests that Gov probably, almost certainly, and with any reasonable response to whatever mitigation Gov puts up, Gov will lose money and lose some capacity to help people as a consequence, right, in the immediate term. Op has more money because you can take this big money from the donors, from the immoral actor. But then there is the problem that they are an immoral actor. And the immoral actor might, if Gov does that work well, based on the stuff we've talked about already, hint that donors don't like that immoral actor. And consequently, that sets up a clash on what motivates donors that will very much affect the issue of the charity. Because if donors are motivated by donating to something that is very morally good, then presumably, if Gov is right there, then presumably Op is going to lose some funding as well in the medium to long term. In fact, maybe in the short immediate reaction, when the money is taken by immoral actors. So with that in mind, what does Gov have, right? I think Gov has stuff about why this makes donors leave. And these are the important things you need to answer. One, why donors care about immoral actors donating. And second, why donors therefore leave. So this second thing is really important because if you think, like, there's a tendency, I think, to think about debates in like binary. So like either they care or they don't care. Either they are moral or they're immoral. Either it's fair or it's not fair. But nothing in the world operates like that. So the reality is that as a donor, I might be a bit annoyed that this immoral actor is donating. But that doesn't mean that I will therefore withdraw my donation. That doesn't mean I'll take the effort to go and find someone else to donate to, right? Like, so the first link and the second does not naturally and necessarily link to donors leaving. And that's something that you will need to prove if you want to run this argument. In contrast, that becomes something that Op can refute, right? Op can just listen and be like, look, there's a gap here, and exploit that gap and be like, I don't think donors care, but even if they do care, they don't care enough to leave, and so the Gov doesn't change anything. So that's why you need to prove it. The second thing that Gov needs to do is to explain why we can afford to lose their money, right? And this becomes a bit of a characterization battle in terms of how successful the charity is, which is default back to what I said just now about the setup, but also actually it's about the impact of donors leaving, which is how much, right, do these small donors account for, which means that they hurt you when they leave, and they can mitigate the effect of losing this big immoral donor when you choose to reject them. And I think the classic example for this is the Sanders and Obama political campaigns, right? Where small donations made up a very significant part of their war chest and allowed them to run campaigns that could, to some extent, compete with your corporate funded campaigns. The final thing I've put here is this moral argument question mark thing. So this is where I want to go back to the motion and actually think about what the motion allows you to do. Because the wording of the motion says that you are one charity. Consequently, I actually think that you need to be very careful in the arguments that you do make. Because if you are one charity and you reject the immoral actor's donation, nothing says that other charities can't take their donation. So in my opinion, you can prove it one of two ways. And I probably should have put this on the slide, my bad. The first is that you can be like, look, when one charity rejects the money, everybody must reject the money because you'll publicly say it, will shame anyone who takes it. You can try that, right? And it might work, it might not work. It depends on how much you prove that people care. Everybody cares about the shaming of people who take money from immoral donors. The point is, because your ability to change what happens in the world is dependent on this, I personally am a bit uncertain about the ability to make a moral argument in this debate. The reason for that is, it's not that moral arguments must end in practical outcomes. Sometimes they may not need to. So sometimes you can argue that it is just the right thing to do, independent of practical outcomes. And a classic example for this, of course, is your 2016 World, as in World Unis, your finals and quarterfinals PM speeches by Bosio. That's your classic example of a principle that Harvard ran independent of practical outcomes. But I don't think you have that in this particular debate, because if you want to shout about how bad things are happening, i.e. like sports washing, like charities are being used to wash an image, you need to be able to tie that to therefore there's better outcomes, because the failure to help and the loss of money means that the cost that you are incurring in this debate is people dying. And as a result, I think like trying to stand on a moral pedestal is not going to work if more people are going to die. And consequently, I'm not very convinced by this moral argument. I am somewhat convinced that you can make an attempt to prove that this will stop whatever immorality is going on with the immoral actor. I'm a lot less convinced that you can make a moral argument out of that. And that it will be valuable in the round. I hope that made sense. If it doesn't actually, I'm sure we'll find a feedback mechanism. Yeah. Op case. So op obviously starts with why the charity needs money. And this goes back to the same characterization battle we've talked about before, right? Which is why thinking about the idea of success and problematizing that is really useful in prep. Then I think there's a whole discussion about why donors won't leave or will leave more on the gov side. So I think there's stuff here about why donors don't care about immoral actors donating. And this is all stuff you'll need to prove, right? Like it's characterization battle. Do I do this? Yes, I do this later. So you might want to prove that. You want to prove that donors instead care about something else other than immorality, which means that when you care about immorality, people will leave and like stop donating to this charity. Or you could go for the argument that people just won't leave because they don't care. Now, the important thing to note is that obviously there is a mutual exclusivity in these rebuttals, i.e., if you run that donors will leave because they don't like charities making moral decisions, you can't also run that nobody will leave charities because people just donate for the sake of doing good and don't think too much about it, right? So those two arguments are like contradictory. And if you remember just now, I said that one possible response to Gov is to say, yes, they care, but not enough to leave because nobody actually cares about leaving. That's again another slightly tenuous rebuttal to saying that people will leave for other reasons. That people will leave the charity because they don't like charities making moral decisions. So the point I'm making here is when you are looking at the round, ideally you see all these possible rebuttals, but you also need to look at them to see if they can fit together. And if not, you don't want to run a contradictory rebuttal, not because it hurts your credibility or whatever. I don't believe in judging like that, but just because if it's contradictory, either both arguments fall out or only half those arguments can possibly stand in the debate. The final thing I want to talk about op is whether charity should be making moral decisions. So I do actually think that there is room for op to make this principle. Because I think there is room to say if charities are taking people's money on the promise of helping people like dying folks, then it cannot be that they then impose their morality when other people don't have the capacity to like speak about this morality. And even if they say you like are giving money, the point is you've already given that money on the assumption that it's going to help people, not on the assumption that it's going to help one particular charity's moral views, especially if the debate is about the environmental movement rejecting money from Harvey Weinstein. Actually, more like the Me Too movement rejecting money from Shell, right? So I think there's room to suggest that this betrays the trust between the charity and the donors, and therefore that's not something that we can stand by. I think there's room for that moral argument. So, resolving clashes, which is what is quite important, I think. So first on this idea of the charity's immediate future, and I think that in the best debates that have some respect for the real world, I say this because I think a lot of debates these days, even at uni level, don't really respect the constraints that the real world places on them, like blatant lying about the world looks like, unrealistic argumentation. And I think that this is something we should really try to avoid, because if debates are completely divorced from the real world, then like what is the point, right? And unless there's a small subsection of debates that are meant to be that way, in the majority of the debates, I think the real world should be something that we consider and we allow ourselves to be limited by. And consequently, in this case, I think that this clash should be a wash or a slight win to the op. The question then is, does this clash matter? So I think that Gov trying to get a debate world win and being like, look, charities don't need this money. Like they can perfectly help people regardless of whether big amounts of money from Shell and all come in. I think that that's unrealistic personally. So you could go for the debate world win, but I don't think that that's a very honest way to win the debate. I do think some mitigation can certainly happen. Stuff like PR campaigns, for example. Stuff like the fact that you've got many donors. But in the short run, it's likely that you lose the immediate run. And so that's probably the cost that Gov is going to need to cop in this debate. Op therefore needs to make this cost matter by what they call impacts, but really I mean explaining why the number of people who die is really significant. No one else can help them. We should really be prioritizing them for whatever reason. And this is the trade-off, right? Because you need to explain why the people, you can't just be like, people are dying now, I care about them a lot. If, for example, you think you're going to lose on the reputation of the charity, you need to be like, people are going to die now, and I care a bit less about the reputation of the charity and potential future donation because of whatever reason. So that comparison needs to be there. And that's why I put impacts in inverted commas, because just shouting people are dying is not going to cut it. The donors. The question here is how you win a characterization battle. So what I said just now about how do I prove that the donor is going to how do I prove that donors are going to care or are not going to care? And to me, the answer here is two things. One is incentives and motivations of the donors, which honestly is the structural reasons that if you watch online, a lot of people are doing anyway. So for example, being like, people don't need to feel good about themselves. And that's why people are most interested in seeing what end outcome comes at the end of the day, because they want to get their message from a charity that goes, your donation just sent the kid to school, and then they get their dopamine boost for the day. Or you could say that people actually donate to assuage moral guilt, and therefore the idea of being a good person is really important to them when they donate. And that idea of being a good person therefore cares a lot about whether some immoral actor is using this donation to look good about themselves, and therefore, for example, get less regulatory backlash or less PR backlash for the immoral things that they've done. So that's on the incentives and analysis of it all. The other thing that I think people don't do enough of is examples. Because in this case, examples and analogies are really useful as not as the way you run the argument. It can't be the core of the argument, but it can very much be the explanation that like it's the cherry on top to make the analysis real world. For example, in this debate, I might well say, look, nobody cares about morality of these big names. For example, like fans of Newcastle United, for example, like said they cared a lot about morality and opposed, like presumably said, like sang songs mocking Man City for having oil money. Then they went and took Saudi oil money anyway. That's not a good example. God, my examples are all football. I'm sure there are examples of musicians or singers or movie stars who've been immoral and people just don't really care or just forget about it. And if you forget about it for their random entertainment, they would certainly forget about it for the capacity to do good. Especially because I think it can suggest people don't really think about donations. Like they just set out auto debit, for example, as opposed to actively going out to donate. Because most people don't actively think, I want to like give away money today. The effect of that being that this might potentially help an op team saying that people don't care and will donate anyway. So yeah, incentives, motivations, examples. And Gov obviously needs to find a counter examples to that, people who actually got cancelled. The principle. So this principle, I think the first thing to note is that a lot of the principles in this debate will probably be dependent on outcomes, which in my opinion means that if you can win the outcome, you will also win the principle. You just need to prove that the principle is dependent on the outcome in order to deal with it. But second, if you want to respond, I think primarily you're looking at analytical response to be like, look, honestly, a lot of principle debates, especially at schools level, if you take a step back, the things that they're saying don't actually logically follow from each other and don't logically lead to the conclusion that they're going for, that something is morally wrong or morally right at the end of the day. So you can just rebut like that. Be like, nope, this is not necessarily true. Here's why. Even if it's true that people are whitewashing their reputation, that doesn't mean that we have a moral obligation to reject all their money, right? So just literally looking at the links of the argument are often a very good way to deal with principled claims that come out in debates. Right, finally, routes to victory for each team. So Gov, I think, has 3 routes, right? One, and the third, I think, is a very difficult one, as I've explained before. The first, I think, is very unlikely. But I think Gov has a very strong second route, which is to prove that the short-term money earned is going to lead to greater money lost at the end of the day for the charity, and consequently that we care more about the later money lost than the short-term money earned. So that's the trade-off that I put in there. In contrast, I think OP has 2 ways in which they can win. The first is that they can prove that the loss of money has a significant effect and that this is more important than future money lost. The second is to prove that donors won't leave. And either of this will break the win route from Gulf, because if I can prove that there is no greater money lost, then the trade-off doesn't even happen, right? But even if the trade-off does happen, if I can prove that I care more about short-term money than long-term money lost, then that wins for op as well. So that's the way in which, as a prepping, in prep preferably, but especially if I was a whip, I will be conceptualizing on how I'm going to strategize my speech, because these are the things I need to prove or disprove in order to win the debate. And that's why routes to victory are a useful concept. Yeah. So that's it for the lecture. If you have any questions, again, maybe in the comment section or whatever other feedback mechanism, we'll try to indicate it. Thanks.